All right, research questions. Last time we were together, and I know it was quite late, we looked at this scaffold for creating your research question, where you write down a specific context, you write down who the focus is, what you're hoping to find out, and any mechanisms and processes that are involved. And then these are all written up into a research question, not necessarily in this order. I hope that you have found time to experiment with this in between now and then, and that you have a few research questions that you can think about during the next few slides. If you haven't, please stop and take a moment to do that. It won't take that long. Think of it as a creative and artistic thing to do, to brainstorm some research questions. Write them out so that you have between, I would say, 3 and 5 research questions, and then we'll talk about how to select the best one. Once you have your research questions written out, I want you to examine them for a few important ideas. And once you figure out if they have these aspects, you should be getting a little closer to which research question you want to use. Number one, think about feasibility. Is this research question feasible for a 2-quarter study where you're going to collect a few pieces of data this quarter and then do some analysis next quarter? So in this example we talked about before, we can't find out whether it increases retention because that's a multi-year endeavor. And we also can't find out how integrating academic and student programs works because, again, that would take too long. The other thing is there's research questions that are too general, such as this one. What is the relationship between teacher change and professional development? This is a fine question to start with, but you would need to specify what teacher change you're interested in, and you would need to specify what kinds of professional development. So you might end up with something like, what is the relationship between teacher shifts in practice towards more culturally responsive pedagogy and lesson study-based professional development? So by now, you should have taken your 3 to 5 questions you had and either made them more specific or feasible, or crossed off the list the ones that were not feasible or specific. And now we'll go through a series of questions. If you want, you can take notes or pause this video and reflect on your questions. Again, either making them more towards each of these bullet points or crossing the ones off that are not. So first you can ask yourself, can I define all of the concepts in the questions? So in this example question, you would need to be able to define what you mean by alternative education setting, which all of you have done extensive literature review, so you should be able to. And then you would need to be able to define project-based learning. And you would need to be able to find marginalized students, right? Because these are the 3 main concepts in this research question. This one here, of course, is related. Can I specify where I got these concepts from? This should be, a definition within the literature usually. Again, all of this I would imagine is already written up, but if you would like to, bring it into one place, that might be a good step. Then think about what is the appropriate evidence for answering this question and how much evidence could answer it. Now, in a pilot study, we may not fully answer any given question, but it's good to start thinking about this. This is the foundation of your methods, right? You might think this question, in what ways are science teachers incorporating project-based learning into their work with marginalized students, might need a series of observations. And because it says teachers, maybe we would want to do one observation for each of 3 teachers, right? That would be one way to answer that question in a pilot study. You might also answer it with 3 interviews because maybe you're getting the teacher perspective. This question, to what extent does the question account for something important, is something that you have to answer in your own heart and also through the literature. In this case, I could probably make the argument that science teachers incorporating project-based learning is really important to link marginalized students with access to STEM careers and to an understanding of STEM practices and all of this. And that would be a big piece of my main argument and my introduction. And finally, What are the assumptions underlying the question? This gets back to your work in the educational reform class with Rosanna. So really thinking about what kinds of theoretical assumptions are driving your research. What is important? What are the beliefs and ideas that are guiding your research here? So next, we're going to dig into the main assignment, the pilot study proposal. Um, so this is the introduction. This is what's listed in your assignment, although there's a couple of additional bullet points to explicate, and I want to talk a little bit about this. Your introduction should contain 1 to 2 paragraphs that introduces the problem and provides a context or a background. So it should have a statement of the general problem and why it's important, and the historical, political, or social context and background of the problem. So you're convincing your reader, hey, this problem is really important. It's really big, or it's really important politically, or it's really important socially or historically. The next section is 1 to 2 paragraphs that identify the focus of your study. So here you're narrowing. What is the specific topic within this big problem that you're interested in? And we're going to go over a couple of examples. And finally, you have 1 or 2 paragraphs that have the rationale of your study and list the practical goals, because this is really important for our practice, and the intellectual goals, what it will contribute to the research. And next slides will go over how this works. So this is just a little bit of graphic to help you understand what I'm talking about with the introduction. The introduction generally goes from the general to the specific. You start with the overall problem, and you're really making the societal argument, goes to the focus of the study. This is your piece of it, and then the purpose and rationale exactly of your study. So I'm going to call out how this works in the example assignment that I have uploaded for you, and then I'm going to actually show you that in this presentation. So you can see here that the problem the student's talking about, they really lay out this groundwork that there's this increased English language population, that we really need to meet their needs, but that their needs are not met due to policy and to teachers being underprepared. Then after laying out the context and background of this problem, the student has a paragraph or two saying, hey, the focus of this study is about what teachers need. What do they need, and what are their experiences regarding their preparation for teaching ELLs? So the focus of the study is teacher preparation for teaching English language learners. And then going further down, talking about the study purpose is to guide future professional development through understanding the challenges faced by teachers and their need for professional development. So you can see how this is a bit of a funnel. So you can see here where the student has, that's the sample paper, has done what we just talked about more or less pretty well. So she talked right here about the broad problem, right? In the last decade, schools have seen an increase in the population of English language learners. And then gives even a fact about it, right? To convince you, a piece of evidence. And says, look, we need to effectively support them, but teachers are not prepared. And in addition, then she lays out this problem of policy, that the programs are only monolingual. It's maybe a bit of an aside, but it's okay. It's laying out the historical context, and then ties this policy into the sort of instructional gap. Okay, so that's this part of the introduction. I will continue on the next slide with the next part. All right, so in this part of the introduction, she lays out her topics. You can see how she says this right here. We rarely examine how the experiences as teachers of English language learners in a bilingual program impact the teacher's learning experiences. So she's interested in teachers in bilingual programs and their own learning experiences and what they need, their beliefs and perspectives regarding professional development. All right, so she starts to lay out her topic and what she's interested in. And then finally, in this last paragraph, she argues for the purpose of her study, that it has several goals. And now I think that this paragraph does need a little reorganization, just so you know, and maybe even adding the words first, second, third, fourth would help lay it out a little bit better. But she says the study will provide insights into the learning needs of bilingual teachers. So this is a practical goal. We can actually meet their needs. Administrators can meet their needs. And later on, she talks about how it contributes intellectually to the research. She says it seeks to surface teachers' experiences that might be considered in the decision making. And let's see, the ultimate goal is to provide a window into specific challenges of bilingual educators. So it could be made a little bit stronger in terms of how this contributes to the research, but that is where she lays out the purpose. So I'll end this discussion of the assignment with just a brief touching base on alignment. So here's the little figure again, right? You've got your problem, you've got the context of the problem, you've got the literature, and then the clearly identified gap in the literature, and then that's all connected to the research question, and that goes to the methods. As we go along, I'm going to be giving you some hints and ways to scaffold the alignment, and the next slide is my first hint. All right, here's the idea. The language of the introduction, so the problem, the focus, the purpose, and what's in the literature review and what's in the RQ should all be, the research question that is, should all be aligned. They should all focus on the same key constructs, the same key ideas, and except for the first paragraph of the introduction. The first paragraph of the introduction sometimes is a little bit more broad, like it's about the problem going on in society and so forth, or the first couple of sentences of the first paragraph. So you can use your graphic organizer for the research question as a help with this, right? So this is one of the questions that I showed you on last Friday. So you can see here the context and alternative education setting, the who is science teachers, and then the what is incorporating project-based learning into their work with marginalized students. So in my problem, in my introduction, and in my literature review, these elements should come out, right? I should have a definition and a description of what happens in alternative education settings. I should have a description of, maybe the problems facing science teachers, who they are. I should have a definition of marginalized students and why they ended up in alternative education settings. And I should have a description of why project-based learning might meet their needs, right? Like, this can guide the kinds of things that go in the literature review. Now, it might need to be a little bit broader, like maybe there are pieces of context, historical context, or social context that would need to go. But your research question and what's in it and what you have seen in your graphic organizer for the research question will really help you guide what's in the rest of your introduction and your literature review.